The remains of a sinister walled complex lost to the freezing waters.
Why was this area flooded? What did it used to be?
A forgotten passageway that leads into the depths of a mountain.
This gaping hole in the rock face that looks like some kind of entrance into the underworld.
Strange military structures hidden in a snow-covered forest.
There's something not quite right about this structure. At first sight, you think you know what it is, and then when you get closer, it doesn't quite add up.
And a huge industrial relic near the coast in mainland Europe.
This elevated rail line just terminates in this massive monolithic contraption.
Once they were some of the most advanced structures and facilities on the planet, at the cutting edge of design and construction. Today they stand abandoned, contaminated, and sometimes deadly. But who built them and how? And why were they abandoned? In Estonia, the Eastern European country formerly occupied by the Soviet Union, is a complex with a troubled past. A sprawling, guarded compound, partly immersed in a nearby freezing lake.
This is such a curious sight. There's this lovely lake. Only one problem. There's been concrete structures in the middle of the lake.
What you see is this weird landscape. Nature's essentially kind of taken over.
The way they sit there, there's almost something apocalyptic about them.
In the depths of the lake is a bizarre sight. Forgotten machinery, lengths of barbed wire, and walls topped with floodlights.
The building scrawled in graffiti juts imposingly out of the lake. And a hill that looks strangely out of place in what is otherwise very flat terrain.
Sharp veins carved out of the steep slope lead up to a tree-covered ridge high above.
Could they give a clue as to why these structures have been left to just crumble away?
It was not a place anybody wanted to be.
The clues are linked to the decades that followed the 1940 occupation of Estonia and other Baltic states by communist Russia. Some 500,000 Soviet troops took part in the invasion, which saw the presidents of Estonia and Latvia arrested and imprisoned. Rigged elections were organized that resulted in new Soviet puppet governments being installed that immediately requested admission into the Soviet Union. They were graciously accepted. Soon, there were mass deportations of enemies of the people. It was just the beginning of the Sovietization of the Baltic states. The Soviets began to implement huge infrastructure projects across their new empire, which created a desperate need for construction materials. And this partly submerged site was all part of the Soviet plan. This is Muru Prison. But how was it linked to the Soviet search for construction materials?
When the Soviet Union begins to occupy the Baltic regions, and Estonia in particular, it gets really ugly very quickly. Anyone who voices opposition to the Soviets, more often than not, they're put into a prison. This was one of the most oppressive prisons in all of Europe. It was not a place anybody wanted to be.
The prisoners lived and worked in inhumane conditions and were treated harshly.
It was a place you were put as punishment. And the punishment was very severe.
But in the Soviet Union, prisons weren't just used to lock up inmates. They were brutal places for hard labor. So, what did they need an army of workers for here at Muru Prison?
This part of Estonia is really famous for its limestone quarries that produce this material that was really easy to process.
Pure ones have this kind of marble-like quality. They're very light in color. They don't have many impurities. And it means when you want to use them for things like cement, and when you want to use them in the paper industry and so on, they're the ideal type of limestone.
It may not look like it now, but in 1938, a quarry was built here at Muru Prison. Its aim was simple: to excavate vast amounts of limestone. And the size of this strange hill is a clear sign of the extent of the operation.
In terms of mining, a slag heap is essentially the rocks that you don't want. And so as you process the rocks and mine them, if you've got an area which you're collecting and say 50% of the rocks are good and the stuff that you want, and the rest is really rubbish, if the mine has a long life to it, these slag piles can be almost like small mountains.
But without giving the inmates heavy machinery, how was the limestone removed?
You'll actually just blast the areas with dynamite and collect the limestone accordingly. The reason why the Soviets built a prison next to this quarry is that really you just need sort of brute force to get the rocks into smaller pieces so you can transport them away. So if you can have a large labor force, they don't have to be particularly that skilled, that can attack the rock mass in terms of breaking it down into smaller pieces so you can take it away, then that's ideal for you.
To prevent escape, the site was surrounded by heavily guarded security fences, which were lined with barbed wire. But as demand increased, a new, unexpected complication arose. Could the overuse of manual labor have contributed to the flooding of the site?
As you go further and as you potentially go deeper, then you might encounter some problems. For example, you might start to get into groundwater, and this is clearly an issue that happened at Rumu.
As they dug deeper, water began to pour in, creating dangerous conditions and bringing work to a grinding halt. To clear it out, pumps were installed in a central building.
Working the mines here would have been a very physical challenge, and clearly if you're in an environment where it can go below zero in winter, they're constantly pumping groundwater out, you're not being fed very much. This would have been very harsh conditions for anyone to work. The sheer amount of groundwater that's flooded back into the mine shows you just how far they were going to extract the resource.
The site was originally constructed to house just 400 inmates. But when they struggled to fulfill their quotas, the police came up with a simple solution to increase the number of workers.
The way the Soviets coped with the acute labor shortages was by forced labor in prison. Forced labor of things that nobody wanted to do, even if you paid them well, because they're difficult, they're backbreaking, and they're long, long hours. No one's gonna sign up for that, so what do? You make them do it. You put them in prison and say, this is your job.
Whenever they needed more workers, there'd be more arrests for hooliganism. Many of the prisoners were sentenced for social crimes, effectively public order offences.
According to a CIA report, the local area was home to 3 forced labor camps. Together, they housed a combined workforce of 5,200 prisoners.
Many prisoners died because of cruel treatment, poor food, and appalling working conditions.
There were rooms dedicated to psychic and physical torture. And if you resisted too much, they took you into another room where they asked you to kneel down and put your head against the wall, and they shot you in the back of the head.
But how did this place end up in a watery grave?
When the Cold War ended and Russia vacated Estonia, there was no political appetite of any kind to maintain, what they had created. And why would there be? It was a place of oppression. It was a place of death. And so they just let it go.
As communism retreated, conditions at the prison began to improve. Forced labor was ended, the quarry site was closed, and the pumps were switched off.
If you're excavating below the level of groundwater and you're pumping the groundwater out to suppress that groundwater from flooding the mine, obviously the minute you turn the taps off, it's going to start flooding again.
The rising waters swallowed up machinery and buildings before they could be saved. But the surviving section of the prison remained in use for another 20 years, finally being abandoned for good in 2012.
Today, the prison is a stark reminder of a cruel and vanished empire and of a discredited penal system.
Five kilometers southeast of Waynesboro, Virginia, USA, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, there is an ominous sight. In the depths of the forest is a hidden archway cut straight into the middle of a hillside.
You're faced with this gaping hole in the rock face that looks like some kind of entrance into the underworld. Once you get inside, all you can make out is this dark passageway disappearing off into the distance.
1.5 kilometers away, buried far inside the woods, is a second entrance to this underground lair.
There's something pretty spooky about it. You wouldn't want to go wandering off on your own too far.
But deep inside, a wall blocks the route. Did the two sides ever connect? And what exactly was this underground site built for? The answers are hidden in the history of the United States, as it underwent a dramatic transformation around 200 years ago. This was the age of industrialization, when the appearance of steamboats and railroads and the invention of communication devices such as the telegraph made trade possible throughout vast swathes of the country. The market economy and the factory system, which were rare beforehand, began to flourish along these new transportation routes. The East Coast towns were booming, but the Blue Ridge Mountains, part of the mighty Appalachians, formed a natural barrier to the heart of the continent, all but cutting off trade links to those central areas.
As a mountain range, they're not particularly big, but they're made up of very, very hard rocks. There's old metamorphic rocks, there's granites in there, and so any topography like that becomes a big, big problem.
To travel across the mountains, you had two choices, either along a canal at a painful 4 miles an hour, or in a bone-rattling stagecoach.
To speed up the crossing, plans for a new tunnel system were quickly drawn up. And in 1850, work started on this unique design.
It's narrow and high, 16 feet by 21 feet.
That's quite an unusual shape to have for a tunnel. We're used to having quite rounded, gradual curves.
Could the unusual shape be the key to success? Alan Hale is a local expert on the history of the structure.
Initially, the impetus was to build canals. But ultimately, it was seen that the best means of transportation as it came towards the middle of the 19th century were railroads.
It was planned as a 1.5-kilometer long underground track. Masterminded by French engineer Claudius Crozet, it would become known as the Crozet Tunnel.
This is a real feat of engineering. They did it by hand, by sweat, blood and tears, with only essentially gunpowder to help them on the way.
But there are no rail tracks here today, and walls inside block off the tunnel. So what happened?
When you want to build a tunnel from one side of a mountain to another, you look at the rock types. Ideally, you want a soft enough rock that you can carve into, but it has to be hard enough to maintain a tunnel. In the Blue Ridge Mountains, there's a particular problem because the rocks are quite hard. You've got granites on one side, and you've got greenstones on another. This kind of metamorphic volcanic rock that's very, very hard.
How would they cut through almost 1.5 kilometers of solid rock?
Construction techniques for tunnels at the time were a far cry from what we've got available today. So much so that progress went at about 1 foot a day into the mountainside.
This tunnel was drilled by hand. You can see remnants of these drill holes. Here's one up on the wall there. One man swinging a sledgehammer and another holding a bit, which turned and turned and turned. It would be about 3 feet at the most, and then shot with black powder.
Black powder is dangerous because at best it's unpredictable. Many deaths, many casualties would have occurred because of that.
But this was not the only danger that faced them.
As you tunnel through a rock mass, the nature of that rock mass changes. And where you get faults or cracks within the rocks, or you might get two different rock types against each other, you can actually have water coming into those gaps. The worry is that these areas where the water's coming through are actually weak.
So what they had to do was to shore that up. So they put in a thick wall of bricks to essentially line that portion of the tunnel to ensure that it remained safe and stable.
The dangers of rockfall are paramount. This is indeed what caused many of the injuries and fatalities during the excavation of the tunnel.
In total, 14 men died whilst working here, and many more were injured.
So as we go into the tunnel here, you'll see that all of this is through solid rock. And basically, nothing has changed here from the 1850s when this was bored through the mountain.
As one of the 6 competing lines racing to cut through to the central states, this Virginia route had to be completed quickly. To double the speed, they went at it from both sides at once. But did the unique slender design of the tunnel offer another solution?
The idea was, in this very difficult conditions with the hard material, to try and maximize the amount of area of material that the men were working on at any one point. People really doubted Crozet and whether his design was actually going to work, whether he could really pull this off.
The tall shape meant that 2 separate crews were able to work on the tunnel at the same time. First, the header crew made a start on the roof section. Next, the footer crew followed on, digging through the lower level to create the floor of the tunnel. It would effectively halve the construction time. But as they were digging from both sides at once, would the 2 tunnels line up and meet in the middle?
So nearly 7 years had gone by. The workers had been working in very back-breaking conditions. There were unstable explosives. They had one of the coldest winters on record. They were hit by cholera. But one day, they actually got to the point where they created about a 2-inch hole and you could see through from one side of the tunnel to the other.
They're only a few inches out. They were almost dead-on message in terms of where they were predicting the one tunnel meeting the other. Amazing engineering feat for that time.
When it opened, it was the longest mountain railroad tunnel in the world, stretching 1,300 meters. Slashing the time it took to send goods across the mountains, the valuable market in the West was now open for business. Despite its great success, as freight trains and carriages grew larger, Crozet's ingenious design became outdated and too small. So, if the tunnel was completed, then why do the two sides not connect today?
In the 1950s, a gas company was planning to store gas in the center of the tunnel. And what you see here is a reinforced concrete bulkhead which seals off the interior 2,000 feet of the tunnel.
Ultimately, that project failed, but the walls blocking the tunnel remain. Today, the crumbling tunnel entrances are reminders of the sacrifices made and the bold ambition of the engineers who hope to build a better future for the United States.
At the end of the day, the structure was used and it did help the country and the economy of the local area. I have a lot of admiration for the tenacity of the engineers to make sure that this project got built.
"45 kilometers from Finland's capital Helsinki stands a pair of abandoned towers. Located in a snow-covered forest, these identical structures are hidden amongst the trees.
At first sight, it's that you assume this was just a standard European medieval church. But there's something not quite right.
Only when you get close can you see that this is not made of stone. It is made of poured concrete. It's got to be 20th century.
Locked up and sealed off for decades, were the locals here trying to forget past events? The tower's construction hint at a sinister purpose, like they're designed to withstand an apocalyptic event.
The tower itself is very massively built. I mean, it's really solid. When you get to the top of the tower, instead of coming to a point, you've got a very obvious platform.
Seen from the top is the small town of Rajamäki, dominated by a large industrial-looking building.
The tower looks like a castle tower, and it's for the same purpose. It gives you a very high, elevated view of the ground around you, but critically here, it gives you a very high, elevated view of the air around you.
So why were these towers built? And why are they here, deep in the Finnish countryside? To unpick the mystery, clues can be found in a forgotten chapter of the Second World War. In November 1939, 3 months into World War II, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. It became known as the Winter War. It began after the Soviets demanded that Finland give up large areas of border territory in exchange for land elsewhere. This was officially for wider security reasons, but mainly for the defense of the vital port of Leningrad, which was 32 kilometers from the Finnish border. Finland refused, and the Soviets invaded. In temperatures as low as -43 degrees Celsius, the Finns at first managed to repel the attacks. But the Soviets reorganized, and the Finns became hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. The Soviets had around 3,000 tanks, the Finns just 32. They were in desperate need of effective defense.
As far as Stalin is concerned, there is no way a country the size of Finland, with a tiny population, is going to say no to the might of the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, the Finns had other ideas.
One way of improvising an anti-tank defense was the creation of the Molotov cocktail. Simply a bottle filled with kerosene, tar, gasoline mixture, and it could be ignited by a sulfuric acid fuse.
Simpler versions of Molotov cocktails, made from a bottle of petrol with a flaming rag in the top, have been used in conflicts across the world ever since the Spanish Civil War. But it was the Finns who first realized its full potential as a weapon in guerrilla warfare.
Desperate times require desperate measures, and the Molotov cocktail ranks there pretty high as a desperate weapon. It's a very, very dangerous way to attack the enemy.
However lightly armoured a tank might be, if all you've got is a uniform, a rifle, and a bottle filled with petrol, it takes a lot of guts to try and sneak up on it, to try and get close enough to plant your petrol bomb on its vulnerable area, which is the rear deck above the engine.
To manufacture enough Molotov cocktails, the Finnish army go to the state alcohol plant at Rajamäki. They take bottles of alcohol, and there they are manufactured into Molotov cocktails. It's firebombs on an industrial scale.
Incredibly, the Soviets suffered 5 times as many casualties as the Finns. But with their superior numbers, they stepped up their attack. And the Molotov cocktail factory soon became a key target.
There's a problem, though. Because this is a state alcohol plant, it's got the name of the alcohol plant on the cap. When the Soviets find these caps, you might just as well have held up a big flag saying, "The enemy is here." It's now very easy to find where these are being made, and thus it's very easy for the Soviet bombers to arrive and target the factory.
Plans were quickly drawn up to bolster the town's defenses.
If you're looking at Finland, one of the main problems the landscape offers to any anti-aircraft gunner is that there are an awful lot of trees in the way. The only way to extend your horizon, to get yourself a clear field of fire for incoming bombers, is to lift your anti-aircraft gun off the ground. And that's why the only solution was to build a tower.
Standing just 500 meters away from the bottling plant are the Rajamäki Towers. Each was built to hold an anti-aircraft or flak gun, capable of unleashing deadly fire upon approaching enemy aircraft.
A flak gun is simply an artillery piece which is made with a high elevation on the barrel to bring aircraft down. It'll shoot a shell high into the air. That shell will burst near the aircraft, hopefully, and the bursting fragments will bring the aircraft down.
The towers could provide the ideal defense. But with the Soviet attack imminent, would they be ready in time?
The Finns were rightly fearful. The Russians really didn't have the capability to drop bombs with precision. So Finnish towns would just be carpet bombed.
The war was moving from the ground to the air, and the Finns would have to scramble a strong defense once again. In Rajamäki, 2 Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft guns were brought in to defend the bottling plant from the ground.
40mm Bofors gun was probably the best, one of the best anti-aircraft weapons ever invented.
Very advanced gun for its time, but not fully automatic by any means. It had to be loaded by the crew themselves. In the Finnish winter, when everything is blanketed by snow, it must have been freezing. Any wind blasting across the landscape is going to hit that crew full on. The gun layers themselves, who are actually looking for targets, sighting targets, the crew who are loading ammunition to it, simply can't be standing there completely wrapped up in furs. They've got to be mobile. It must have been quite grim for that crew, waiting hour after hour to be able to take on a bomber and keep it away from that vital bottling plant.
Seppo Pietarinen works for the local municipality and knows the extraordinary history of the towers.
We are now top of one of the towers, and here is the shaft where the anti-aircraft gun has been lifted up and placed here, top of this shaft. Gun can spin around 360 degrees because the bombers can approach from any direction.
But just 3 months after it had begun, the Winter War was over. The area of Rajamäki had been the victim of 9 separate Soviet bombing raids. But the Finns had held firm, and the factory had survived.
The Soviet Air Force throughout the Winter War, the 3 months of the Winter War, lost hundreds of its aircraft. The normal estimates are about 300 to 400 being shot down by the Finns, either by aircraft or ground defences.
The following year, with the guns now mounted on the completed towers, the war was suddenly back on.
The 2 towers would have been linked by telephone lines, and they would have been linked to command and control center. All through Finland, you would have people with binoculars, with rangefinders on top of buildings, because Finland didn't have a radar system. They relied on this fairly good observer system that would spot Russian aircraft, give their altitude, give the position. The flat guns would be alerted to Russian aircraft, what route, what distance, what speed.
Put yourself in the position of someone on top of one of those flak towers. You're above the tree line, so there's very little camouflage and cover for you. You're in a position where the Soviet bombers can see you are shooting at them from. They're going to target you. You are a sitting target. It's going to take guts to be up there.
Although Finnish defences are very limited, and for example here at Rajamäki, a gun or 2 on towers is not going to ward off dozens of bombers if they really want to get through. The deterrent factor was such that really any kind of resistance would have had a major effect on an attacking force. Even one gun could make all the difference between protecting a site and it being pulverized by incoming bombers.
With the towers and guns in place, the Soviets never targeted Rajamäki again. The only bombers to fly over kept themselves high above and out of range. The towers had done their job. When the Second World War ended, having sided with the Nazis, Finland was again on the losing side. The bottling plant reverted back to producing alcohol rather than Molotov cocktails, and the towers were locked up for good.
When you look at the towers today, they're a symbol of Finnish resistance against the Soviet Union. Everybody played their part, and the towers really stand as testimony to the efforts made by the Finnish people. People who worked in factories, people who fought the Soviets at the front. They really are a testimony to the resilience of the people of Finland.
On the south coast of Spain is the city of Almeria, and near to its heart lies a huge industrial relic. This rusting rail line stretches for nearly 600 meters.
It's a long, snake-like structure that extends out into the water from the city.
This elevated rail line kind of winds through the port town and then just terminates in this massive monolithic contraption that just kind of juts out into the bay.
Here, a giant steel pier supports the rail line as it splits into 4 separate tracks.
Almost like the Eiffel Tower lying on its side. So clearly it's old, but what's its purpose? Where does it go?
Its story is closely tied to the mass industrialization of Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. The economies of the continent were being transformed from those that depended on agriculture to new ones that were based on the manufacture of goods of all descriptions. Mechanized mass production was the key. The factory assembly line replaced the individual worker and the craftsman, and lives were changed forever. All of this new machinery needed material, and it was steel that became king in the new industrial age. Its key ingredient was iron ore, and that was one of the most sought-after resources in the world at the beginning of the 20th century. But dark clouds were gathering, tensions between nations were rising, and the First World War was little more than a decade away. But the old mines of southern Spain just didn't have the infrastructure to meet the new demand.
The mines are located somewhat inland in a slightly mountainous terrain. There's several hundred feet of topographic variation. And that poses a problem because it's somewhat inland. It might be easy to locate the iron ore, to essentially mine it out of the ground, but you have to move it from there to somewhere where you can ship it. So you have to get it to the coast.
The first part was simple: to build a railway line between the mines in southern Spain and Almeria, the nearest port city. But the real problem still lay ahead.
It's hard for most people to imagine today how low-tech ports used to be in their operations. Everything that went on a ship had to be handled by hand.
Transportation of the iron ore from the end of the rail to the ships was an extremely laborious process because by hand, the iron ore was unloaded, stored until a ship would come. And then when the ship would come, by hand, the iron ore was then loaded onto the ship.
Loading a ship full of iron ore might take a week. It was an incredibly inefficient process. What's so brilliant about this project is they completely reimagined how you could load a ship.
With the new political instability across Europe, the old port just couldn't keep up with the increased demands of a rapidly changing world. So would this new hulking mass of steel speed up the process? Construction began in 1901. It would become known as El Cable Inglés, the English pier.
It was solving a very fundamental problem, which was the amount of time and labor it took to transport material. They used engineering to try and create a much more efficient and better way to do that.
Well, the original design of the Cable Inglés was to be made out of wood, but in that particular region, with storms and other environmental conditions, it was decided that metal would be more appropriate and more suitable.
Southern Spain seems somewhat idyllic to most of us, but in the autumn and winter months, it can actually have some quite violent storms. So clearly, areas where you go from calm to storm to calm to storm, those kind of surges mean that a structure, for example, made out of wood might not be good enough to sustain for a long period of time.
The obvious choice of material was steel.
The invention of a modern steel-making process is kind of like the invention of the silicon chip. It was one technological change that then enabled all these other changes. They used the capabilities of this beautiful material to help them mine more iron and make more steel.
But with the future of the Spanish mining industry relying on the success of this project, why was it called the English Pier?
England had the advanced steel mills that needed this ore. They also had all the money. They had all the capital. So they could afford to make these massive investments in countries like Spain, and then a massive investment in the infrastructure to get that ore to the port and onto the ships.
Designed by leading British engineers, the idea was to leave all the heavy lifting to the rail cars and the jetty alone. Supposedly, the days of shoveling ore by hand were over. But was there a new danger?
Instead of having to load the ships by hand, they would roll the rail car right out to the end of this high elevated pier, and they would dump the contents directly into a big chute that led straight into the hull of the ship.
Along the length of each side of the jetty are 20 hoppers. Using gravity alone to move the ore, it would fall straight into those great containers. Then, by selecting which chutes to use, it was poured directly into the ship's hold. Would the new modern system save the local industry?
I think it's such a neat solution to have this system where the chutes take this material from a train to a ship.
In many ways, it reflected the modern, more mechanized way that major ports work today. If you go to a container port, like the Port of Los Angeles, you'll see these giant containers getting loaded on and off boats. No one needs to touch the cargo at all.
It was a problem that needed to be solved, and the solution to that was a great increase in efficiency. It was a process that used to take 10 days. Now it only took 10 hours. It was a quarter of the original cost, which was actually a great savings.
This new technology helped Spanish exports of iron ore grow from just 500,000 metric tons in 1875 to 10 million tons by the eve of the First World War in 1913. With all that growth, why does the English pier lie abandoned on the edge of the city today?
It has its period when it's perfectly optimized for the needs of the ships. And then technologies move on, markets move on, other mines open in other parts of the world.
In September 1970, it ran for the last time. Originally saved from demolition by its historical value, as costs increased, major plans to convert the English pier failed to materialize. So, for now, the old structure continues to stand abandoned on the shore.
It's really impressive to me that the Cable Inglés lasted and was used actively for about 70 years. If you consider the rate of change of technology and innovation at the time, it really shows that they were ahead of their time in the innovations that they used, and also it really solved a problem that needed to be solved.
Now they lie abandoned, but once they were at the cutting edge of engineering. There are echoes from history in these decaying structures. They remind us of terror and war, but also of great innovation and human endeavor.